Awesome, thank you. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the MedicAlert Live Healthy Hour. Today we're going to be talking about malignant hyperthermia, who's at risk and what you need to know. And today's session is presented in partnership with the Malignant Hyperthermia Association of the United States, MHouse, who we've enjoyed a long partnership with, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later. But we're thrilled to have them work with us on sharing this very important information. Today's agenda, we will first just tell you a little bit about MedicAlert. I know a lot of you are familiar, but some of you may be new to MedicAlert, so we'll tell you a little of the background there. We'll introduce our speaker. We'll tell you a little bit about MHouse, Malignant Hyperthermia Association of the US, and then the bulk of our time today is going to be spent in a Q&A with Dr. Stacey Watt. And we're going to be covering three major topics. We're talking more generally about malignant hyperthermia, about diagnosis and testing, and finally about treatment and prevention. And then we'll end, as we always do, with some additional resources for you so that you can learn more about this, this interesting and important condition. So first, just a quick overview of MedicAlert. For those of you who don't know, MedicAlert Foundation has been around since 1956. This is actually our 65th anniversary year, which we're really excited about. We started as, it was originally a doctor's idea. His daughter had a tetanus shot and had an anaphylactic reaction and almost died from it. He knew that she was allergic, but he wasn't at the hospital to tell them not to give her the shot. And he realized, I need a way to be able to protect my daughter in the future, and I can't always be there to tell someone about her condition. So he started with wearing paper bracelets, pinning a note to her shirt when she was going to school. And when she was going away to college, they said, you know, we need something a little more permanent. And that's when he went to a jeweler and he designed the very first, what became the sort of iconic MedicAlert ID that still looks very similar to what many of us wear today. And ultimately, that became the globally recognized symbol for medical emergencies, based on Dr. Marion Collins' vision that started back in 1956. Since then, we've protected millions of people around the world, not just in the US, but around the world, with any kind of chronic medical condition or other medication or something that impacts how they're treated in an emergency. And how are we different? First of all, MedicAlert isn't just the ID. Every MedicAlert member has a full emergency health profile that goes beyond the few lines that you're able to engrave on the ID and really includes medications, medical history, past surgery, allergies, implants, patient instructions, anything unique to you that someone would need to know in order to provide the best treatment for you in an emergency. With that comes a 24/7 response service. So we have a team that is there 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, ready to answer the call from a first responder or a good Samaritan who is needing help to treat you in an emergency. And that team is able to share all that information that's in your profile, so they get the full picture of you. And last of all, we're the only company in the medical alert space that's a nonprofit foundation. All of the funds that we raise through ID sales, through memberships and donations go back into funding our 24/7 emergency response service and providing MedicAlert IDs and memberships for people who may have need of it but can't afford it. So at the end of the day, our mission really hasn't changed in those 65 years. It's about saving and protecting lives by sharing vital information in our members' moment of need. So very simply, what that looks like is in an emergency, first responders are trained to look for a MedicAlert ID. On the back of the ID is our 800 number. They contact us, and our emergency response team is able to share your online health record either over the phone or by fax, or however the best way it is for the practitioner to receive that information. And what that all adds up to is helping you get fast and accurate care in an emergency. So you can imagine if you are on a blood thinner, for example, that's something really important for someone to know in emergency. If you have an allergy, or if you have a condition like malignant hyperthermia, you can see how having a first responder and emergency personnel having that information makes a big difference in how you're treated in an emergency. So enough about us for now. We're going to switch over, and I'd like to introduce our speaker for today, Dr. Stacey Watt. Dr. Watt, thank you so much for joining us.
Of course, I'm so happy to be here.
We are so glad to have you. Dr. Watt is the Chief of Service of the Department of Anesthesiology at Kaleida Health. And I'm going to tell you a little bit more about her background because it's pretty impressive. As a pediatric anesthesiologist, Dr. Watt knows the importance of preparation and anticipating potential problems within the operating room. She uses vigilance not only in her pediatric anesthetic practice, but in her role as one of the malignant hyperthermia specialists who serve on the Malignant Hyperthermia of the United States Hotline. For the hotline, she volunteers her expertise and time to medical practitioners who need guidance when seconds count in a potential malignant hyperthermia crisis. Dr. Watt has not only gained recognition within the anesthesia community, but she's also highly regarded in the world of athletic achievement. As a two-time NCAA All-American in the discus event, and an athlete representing the U.S. in both the Pan American Games and the Olympic Festival, Dr. Watt serves her patients from a very unique perspective. She continues to work with MH as it seeks to uncover the link between malignant hyperthermia susceptible individuals and people who suffer heat-related illnesses and injuries. Dr. Watt has even briefed the U.S. Olympic Committee as it prepares for the heat and strain athletes will face this summer in Tokyo. Very cool. So Dr. Watt, we are thrilled to have you with us, and very excited that you are able to be here to share your knowledge with our attendees today.
Well, thank you so much. I'm looking forward to it.
Good. And one of the organization that brought us together is Malignant Hyperthermia Association of the U.S. Do you want to talk a little bit about MH? I know you serve on the board.
Yes, I'd love to tell you about MH. We are a patient-based organization. We all started from the goal of trying to best serve our patients that suffer from malignant hyperthermia and are under threat of entering the operating room, and how to provide best care. So our entire organization is founded in that very great goal of providing outstanding care for our patients, just like MedicAlert. So we are here to serve our patients, to serve our communities, but also to foster research, as well as to foster great care. So we help guide practitioners that maybe not have dealt with malignant hyperthermia or is comfortable with it. We are here to ensure that they're up to date, they're knowledgeable in MH so they can best care for their patients.
And I know we're going to talk about the hotline a little bit later, but it's such an amazing service that MH provides and that you serve on. And again, we'll talk about that again in a bit. So for now, I'm actually going to jump us right into the questions and answers. And the first one is pretty obvious, just to set the stage for everyone here. What is malignant hyperthermia and who's at risk?
All right, well, malignant hyperthermia is a genetically dominant disorder. So what does that mean? That means if I have it, I have a 50% chance of one of my children to have it, and that I will give them a 50% shot. So it's very prevalent as far as going forth if you have a family that has it within their family gene line. It's also a disorder of skeletal muscle. It predisposes susceptible individuals, those who are predisposed to have MH, to a crisis situation, which is called a malignant hyperthermia crisis. So overall, an MH crisis, upon exposure to a triggering agent, such as an anesthetic gas, and we're going to go through that, but certain elements that will trigger, but we're just going to call them triggering agents for now. Those that are susceptible, when exposed to a triggering agent, they undergo a biochemical reaction, And it's sort of a chain reaction within skeletal muscles that presents very uniquely. And we're also going to cover what it looks like and how we treat it and diagnose it. So we're going to go through all those things. We're going to go stepwise. And it's a rare disorder, but that doesn't mean it's not prevalent out in our communities. And it is life-threatening. So for those that undergo surgery, about 1 in 100,000 of adults will experience an MH crisis, and about 1 in 30,000 children. So you say, well, why are children going to be more prevalent? Well, it's sometimes the first time they're exposed to anesthetics that this will come to light. And then they come out of sort of that gene pool that will come to the next time when they get to an adult and identify them as a first-time MH crisis patient. So believe it or not, all of us that are out there actually have a 1 in 2,000 chance of carrying the genetic code that will have us actually trigger within the operating room. So that's why it's so important and it's so prevalent out there. So again, a crisis is an actual biochemical reaction. And if you think of malignant hyperthermia, I want you to think about a fire or something hot. Hyper is expansive, and I want you to really, in your mind, every time you hear the word now, from this point on, I want you to think about a fire, because that's a lot what I train my patients to do, as well as some of the providers and people that I teach about malignant hyperthermia. It's a fire that you have to put out. So it crops up wherever it can. And if certain conditions are right, you have a susceptible patient with a triggering agent. So it's sort of just like a fire. You have kindling and you got an accelerant. You put those together and you get a fire. And you're going to have to deal with it. You're going to have to deal with it quickly. And you're going to have to identify it fast. So again, those are sort of what we're going to be dealing with today's talk about MH and who's at risk. Anyone that has a genetic code or susceptibility to it, when exposed to the right conditions, can trigger.
Is there any difference in risk between gender, between ethnicity, or any other factors that seem to influence it, or is it just completely genetic?
That's a great question. And unfortunately, MH doesn't pick out a certain population. So you can't go out and say, well, all those individuals that have blonde hair, blue eyes, that are walking out that, are left-handed are going to have MH. Unfortunately, MH doesn't give us that ability to pare down those we're looking at. It's equal opportunity rare disease. So anyone walking around with that genetic code can have it, and not one unique population's at risk. So it's unfortunately a disease for everybody.
I think one of the things I learned from some of the preparation for this is that it's not just sort of one, I think there's one sort of dominant genetic abnormality that can cause it, but there are actually multiple genetic abnormalities that could influence someone's susceptibility. Is that correct?
That is correct. And there's actually 2 genes involved. So there's on 2 chromosomes, chromosome 1 and 19, they both have the ability to sort of cause that fire. So there's also within those 2 chromosomes, there's also multiple genetic variants, they're called, or basically changes that could spark this. So that also is something that our community is really looking at. And that's another great thing about MHouse is we're always seeking the answers for our patients. So we're always going out there and really trying to find out more. So we have some great geneticists on our team and those that are really looking to the genetic code to try to find out more and more variants that match up, right, that we can help patients identify themselves even earlier.
Right. Great. I'm going to take us on to our next question, which is around what you alluded to earlier, some of the common triggers for malignant hyperthermia.
All right, this is what I hear all the time is like, what's going to start the fire? What are the things that are going to happen? So we have a genetic susceptible person, and then we're going to go forth and we don't want them to be exposed to something that'll start the fire. So this is sort of the gasoline on it, which is a general anesthetic. Those are the gas agents when you have an anesthesia machine. Those are the vaporizers or anesthesia gases that are used by anesthesiologists to keep you asleep during the procedure. So there are items such as desflurane, enflurane, halothane, isoflurane, methflurane, sevoflurane. If you notice, there's a theme of fluorines here, but they're the anesthesia gases. Now, this does not include, oxygen, nitrous, those type of things. These are the actual anesthesia gases. They're also called volatile anesthetic gases. But there's another one that's on there. It's an important one, which is succinylcholine. That's a depolarizing neuromuscular blocker. It's a special one. It's used to It's a paralyzing agent we often use in surgeries, especially emergency situations. But there's a third on there that it's not a real anesthetic that triggers, but it's that heat-related and physiologic stress that we're finding more and more prevalent. I know we're going to get to it, but as a little bit of a spoiler to throw in there for the future moving forward. But yes, those are the agents that sort of are like that gasoline. If we're thinking about that fire starting things, that's what's going to sort of accelerate the fire and cause it.
And are these the anesthetics that are used in a typical surgery? They're very common.
Yes, they're very common. And most of our anesthetics, if you go in for a traditional anesthesia and you identify as you don't have any of the things in your background, so you don't have a genetic history of malignant hyperthermia in your family, no one in your family has ever had trouble with anesthesia, and you go in, most likely you're going to encounter a lot of these gas agents during anesthesia. So after you're asleep, they'll put a small breathing device in and they'll turn on the anesthetic gas to keep you asleep and safe during the surgery. So again, very common.
Okay, great. And that kind of leads us into sort of what happens how does malignant hyperthermia first present, and what happens in that MH episode or when that fire starts?
Got it. So during that crisis event, our anesthesiologists are trained to watch monitors, but also watch our patients while they're under anesthesia. But the first often signs that we see are an elevation in heart rate. So all of a sudden there'll be something called tachycardia or elevated heart rate. They, just like the fire, increase metabolism. So you got to think of like that burning. The body's just starting to run. Muscle rigidity. People get really tight. And I'm not talking about just like a little bit of tight. We're talking rock hard. They get that solid of a feel, almost like cement. They have an elevated fever, ergo of hyperthermia. So again, you think that heat and hotness, like heat, and they can actually exceed 110 degrees Fahrenheit is how hot a patient can become during an MH crisis. Muscle breakdown occurs. So they actually end up, their muscles get so tight and they overheat so much that they actually start to break down. An abnormal chemical imbalance. So as those muscles break down, they release chemicals into the system, and that actually can cause a lot of havoc within the body and how it functions. Right. And if you want to think of it this way, and again, we're going to go back to the sort of heat thing. For those of you out there that are automotive experts or, have run a car, if you ever run a car without coolant, you know what happens. The car temperature elevates and damage occurs to all the engine parts, and the engine can seize up and things can happen. I want you to picture that as well. So as these things start to occur and happen, you really have to get in there and provide that engine the ability to move and pump like your heart. So you've got to really address it quickly. You've got to notice the signs and make sure that it's quickly identified and quickly treated and diagnosed. Severe complications can occur. So the symptom is, again, like a fire. It sort of starts with early symptoms and it'll move on and progress. And it can progress all the way to cardiac arrest, brain damage, internal bleeding, and unfortunate death.
Well, I know that thanks to the work that MHouse and the Hotline and other organizations have done, the incidence of fatality of malignant hyperthermia has decreased significantly over the years.
Yes, it has gone down.
At one point in time, it was highly fatal just because people weren't aware of it and didn't know what to do, right?
Yes, and it mirrors, it's a very bad actor sometimes. So if you're not really looking for it, it's the zebra in the room, we call it in the medical world. Everyone looks for the horse, the common thing, but they'll hear clopping and they'll go, oh, it must be they're light with anesthesia, I'll deepen the anesthetic, or they must be warm because the temperature of the room is warm, or something else is happening. So they'll misattribute the signs that they're seeing to something else. And sepsis or an infection in the body can sort of mirror an MH crisis. An elevation in your thyroid. If it's a storm, it's really high, it can look like MH. That's why we need our providers and our patients to be sort of good citizens and saying, no, I have either a history, but also those providers to have the knowledge to say, I know what I'm dealing with and I can get help and I can treat this effectively.
Right.
But thankfully the mortality has gone down due to training. So we're down to what used to be a very severe event that we lost a lot of patients to an event that now is treatable, and we're down to the percentages of it is at lowest I think it's ever been. And we are now, again, anesthesia community is wonderful in that it always seeks to progress and become safer. So we're now down into, I think, below 10% of having a death within the operating room if recognized and treated appropriately.
So a question about that MH episode or MH crisis. How long, if it's in a sort of traditional scenario where it's a reaction to anesthesia, how long after introduction of that triggering agent before the crisis happens? Is it immediate, or is it something that happens post-surgically or mid-surgery?
Oh, wonderful question. So the sneaky thing about MH2 is that it doesn't always say, oh, I hit a triggering agent and it turns on. It can do that. So within seconds of sort of turning on that anesthetic vaporizer or giving that medicine succinylcholine, they can have a fulminant episode within minutes. It can occur that quickly. And they'll show the fulminant signs. They'll get jaw rigidity. They'll have the high temperature, high heart rate, everything will go off. But there's those that during the course of a surgery, an hour in, will start to trigger. I've seen and treated patients on the hotline that have treated in recovery room after the surgery is totally done. The gas is turned off. They're awake in recovery room. And now suddenly they're experiencing symptoms of malignant hyperthermia and have been required to be treated. So unfortunately, MH is sort of an actor that decides when it's going to sort of ignite and start that fire.
So it's not like a anaphylactic reaction, for example, where usually it develops quite quickly and immediately, and it's very clear this is what's happening. It could, especially post-surgically, could be mistaked for a lot of other possible surgical complications.
Yes, absolutely. And people sometimes, and that's why training is so important, is oftentimes when I'm training within a hospital and I'm telling them about the importance of malignant hyperthermia and how everyone needs to be prepared, they said, don't worry. It's something that the operating room has to worry about, not recovery room.
Right.
And the unit says the same thing. Well, we don't have to deal with that. It's not us. And the emergency room says, unfortunately, the same thing. Patients can come back after surgery with an MH episode that starts to, sort of that fire starts to ignite when they've gotten even home. Also, the heat-related illness injury, it's still coming to our emergency department. So it's something that everyone needs to be aware of, what they're looking for, and how to diagnose and treat.
Got it. All right. Our next question is one that was quite a common question, actually. So are there links between malignant hyperthermia and other conditions? Some of the ones people asked about were Williams syndrome, Raynaud syndrome, and Down syndrome. And I believe we had somebody ask about other autoimmune like fibromyalgia in the chat. So would love to hear more about that.
Excellent. So there's three main disease states that sort of are linked very strongly with malignant hyperthermia. One is called central core disease. One is multi-mini core disease. And one is King-Denborough syndrome. They all, if you think about them, have myopathy. So if you think about malignant hyperthermia and you think of that fire and that person that's really rigid, it has to do with that myopathy or muscles. So myopathy means sort of problems with the muscles of the body. So those individuals actually struggle a lot with muscle weakness. They actually end up almost having deformities from it. But other disease disorder states such as Williams syndrome, which is a rare disorder sort of causing a growth delay, they don't have a definite genetic link to it, or Raynaud's or Downs. So those aren't linked. But the three that I've mentioned, again, the central core, the multi-mini core, and the King-Denborough do have a definite link. Now there's two others that are linked in a way. So the Duchenne's muscular dystrophy and a myotonic dystrophy, that if exposed to succinylcholine, that depolarizing drug, the paralytic we talked about, they'll actually have a cardiac arrest, but it's due to something else. Right. But they might have a warning sticker on them that says treat as malignant hyperthermia. But these are great questions because you want to know, the world of genetics is always expanding and looking different, and we're finding links to all sorts of things. So these are great questions, and to find out, am I at risk? Right. So unfortunately, no, as far as Williams syndrome, Raynaud's, Down syndrome, those aren't linked. But if you were diagnosed with, again, those that I've mentioned, it is time, and they should have identified you already as a malignant hyperthermia susceptible patient.
Great. All right, now talking a little bit about diagnosis and testing. So if I have a family history of MH, how do I know I'm susceptible? Can I know without testing? And if only one parent has MH, am I still at risk?
Again, wonderful questions. I love them. So whoever came up with them, kudos to you guys. So if you have a family history of a malignant hyperthermia, like we talked in the beginning, it's autosomal dominant inheritance. So I have it. I have a kiddo. The kid has a 50% chance, believe it or not, of getting malignant hyperthermia from me. So if you have a family history, without testing, unfortunately, there's no way to know. There's not a sign that you get a certain freckle or you have some type of physical thing that you could say, oh, well, I must have it because I have this. Unfortunately, it lies within your DNA, and we have to discover if you have that changes. So again, if one parent has malignant hyperthermia, are you still at risk? Absolutely. And your anesthesiologist, the day that they talk to you, will say, is there anybody in your family that has malignant hyperthermia or an adverse life-threatening reaction to anesthesia? Malignant hyperthermia is the exact thing that they want to know about.
Right.
So the great thing is we have testing that can help them. Either it's called CHCT or caffeine halothane contracture testing. And now genetic testing is available for individuals to find more information out.
Right. All right. So we're going to talk a little bit more about testing next, I believe. Yes. So
All right.
what tests are available for malignant hyperthermia? And are there tests that don't require surgical procedure? And is testing always conclusive?
All right. So malignant hyperthermia, the gold standard test, the test that everyone says this is the test that we need to determine, is something called that caffeine halothane contracture test. It's done at certain sites, and the reason being is it has to be done in a certain way, and muscle has to be tested live. So to make sure that it responds, because they actually expose it to the anesthetic agents to see if it contracts, just like a response to it. So you have to go to a certain site and get tested in a certain way and get it approved in the whole 9 yards. It's about 70% of accuracy rate with the test, which is pretty good. It's a pretty high percentage rate. It's not 100%. Genetic testing, we're in that 60 to 80% of families that have a variant or change in the genetic code that we identify as one of the bad actors for malignant hyperthermia. That could figure out if they have a mutation in those areas, then they're more susceptible and will be deemed a malignant hyperthermia susceptible individual. And to get those, you can find all those great resources right on our MHouse website. So as you can see by the wonderful slide up here, you can go to our website, you'll look through and find out about testing ability and our genetic testing. We have some links to help get you in touch with a genetic counselor to really walk you through what you need to have to get genetically tested, get those results back, and then move forward with sort of sharing those results with your family. Because remember, it's genetic, which means every member of your family is involved.
Right. So you mentioned earlier that the different, I guess, efficacy rates of the test. Sounds like the CHCT was slightly more effective in identifying MH.
Yes, it is a more definitive test,
okay.
But it's invasive. So that's why we're also looking at really trying to get that genetic materials down to find a better accuracy rate. We're not there yet. And we're finding more and more genetic variants that are linked to malignant hyperthermia. So if you want the best chance of getting the highest accuracy rating, the halothane contracture test is your best bet. But genetics is quickly, thankfully, to all these individuals working hard to find the answers, it's getting there with finding more and more accuracy and again, finding those variants and helping people. Also remember that even if you have a variant, the penetrance or the ability for that fire to spark isn't 100%. So even if you're exposed, you have that variant within you and you have an anesthetic and you have another anesthetic and a third anesthetic, it might be the 101st anesthetic that all of a sudden you spark and you have a reaction to, because it's called something called penetrance or the ability for it to come through. So you're always at risk if you have this genetic variable. You can't say, well, I had anesthesia and then I got tested and I have a genetic variability that has sort of that positive malignant hyperthermia, so I must not have it.
Right.
Well, you're making a really large gamble with yourself and also, again, any blood relative that has that same genetic code.
That sounds like an interesting game of roulette if you're taking that chance. So who needs to be tested?
Well, if you have any family member that's a blood relative that has malignant hyperthermia, testing is a good option. Also, you have kids that you think to yourself, this might be a really great opportunity to find out more for them as definitively as I can if they have it or not. Or if you're experiencing a lot of maybe muscle myalgias or you're having some issues, it might start to be a time to talk to your doctor more about what are you experiencing and could it be a relationship to it. We'll talk more about other signs and symptoms that you might have if you're not undergoing a malignant hyperthermia episode in the operating room, signs and symptoms, but what you're out and may experience in lay public. If you might be, again, exposure to those heat and stress related events, what you could look for and help prevent a crisis situation from sort of moving on to an actual malignant hyperthermia event that could harm you.
So I want to follow up on two things you just said there. One, I think, was that you may have had surgery before and not had a MH crisis, but you potentially could still be MH susceptible. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay.
I love when people tell me, don't worry, I've had 2 anesthetics before. I'm totally fine. I don't have it. Even though my brother has it, I don't have it because I've had 2 anesthetics and I'm good. Unfortunately, it could be within you and it probably is lying in wait for that 4th, 5th, 6th, and you could roll the dice and you might not trigger, but you might.
Right.
So you have to always be on the lookout, be aware, be your best advocate. Because you are the strongest voice for yourself, your family, that if it lies within your family realm, you should be the one sharing this information with the anesthetic provider. You should be sharing it with your doctor. You should be sharing it with your friends and family around you so that if a crisis situation, an accident occurs, they know how to be your advocate as well. And that's why also this is a great opportunity to share those bracelets, tattoos, those type of things, events that could alert people to how to best take care of you in a crisis situation when you can't speak for yourself.
That's helpful. Thank you. And then I think the other thing I want to follow up on is for, do we have any inkling of how many people may be MH susceptible and are undiagnosed or unidentified? Because maybe someone in their family had a crisis that maybe wasn't identified as an MH crisis.
Great question.
And that information doesn't necessarily get passed along or handed down. So, what's the incidence that we may not know about?
Well, the incidence is so widespread and varied. There's been publications of 1 in 40,000 people out there have it and are walking around with it, 1 in 30,000, all the way up to 1 in 100,000. Everyone says it, but I want everyone to go through and ask I call it the village elder, the family member that you have that knows the family history of everyone and say, has anybody in our family ever passed away during anesthesia or as a result of anesthesia? And you'll see them sit back and think, well, wait a minute, there was someone that died during anesthesia, but we don't know why. That should be an alert to everyone that hears that to think, well, they say, oh, don't worry about it. It was years ago. Well, it still is very relevant because that might have been a malignant hyperthermia event. You don't know until you ask. So I encourage every listener that's out there, of the 125 participants that are listening to my voice, I want you to go back and find the person in your family that knows the family history the best and ask them that question. Because it's amazing all the information you can get about your family from that one individual that says, well, wait, I actually do know someone that really had a problem.
Great. That's fantastic advice. Thank you so much. Our next question was, and I think we may have answered this, but we'll just talk to it for definitively. Is there a less expensive or less invasive way than biopsy or genetic test to assess the risk of my children if, for example, I have MH?
Unfortunately, there's not really something that we could look for or test like something easy like a swab, oral swab or something that, other than genetic testing and oral swab, that could really tell you if they have it or not. So unfortunately, it's not like a real simple like glucose stick or something that we can tell. We're not there yet. I hope someday that we have the ability to test every newborn that comes out with a finger stick. They have malignant hyperthermia susceptibility, goes on their medical chart, and they're safe. And they'll always be able to have that information be cared for. Unfortunately, we're not there. We're going to get there someday. I have faith in that. But right now there's nothing there that really could assess a child's risk other than really paying attention to the medical history of the family. And if they're adopted, asking the questions of the birth family or finding that information out is, hey, anybody in the family, their birth family really have that history of malignant hyperthermia.
If I have MH and my child has not been tested, should they be treated as someone who is potentially MH susceptible? It sounds like it because there's a 50% chance they might be, right? So
Yes.
even without testing, they still need to take precautions.
Yes, they should definitely take precautions, because if you don't know and there's a family history, they will always, by any anesthesiologist that asks the question and says, hey, does anybody in your family have malignant hyperthermia or died during anesthesia? And they say yes, they will automatically, that anesthesiologist will say, oh, malignant hyperthermia is a risk factor, and they will be treated as a malignant hyperthermia susceptible because it's the safest thing to do for them. It's the best thing for their care. And there's anesthetics we can do that actually remove those triggering agents, get that gasoline off the table to start the fire, and provide a safe anesthetic for them. So reducing risk, and that's what we're all about, reducing risk and caring for our patients.
Great. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that in a second, what precautions folks can take. But in the meantime, I think this was a fantastic question. What physician specialty would help me diagnose, test, and manage MH?
Got it. So as far as diagnosis of malignant hyperthermia, the best person to go through with it, true diagnosis, is getting to a genetic counselor and really getting them to understand what the ramifications are, because you do need a little bit of a guide to help you through the process of genetic testing. It's not just a quick swab and you send out the results, although those things are available. You really have to digest what the meaning of those results will be. So I always am a very strong proponent of getting them to a genetic counselor to find out more. The test itself can be helped through the genetic counselor. Malignant Hyperthermia Association of the US, or MHouse, can also help you with finding a testing facility that can get you that test, or getting even a letter of need for really helping you manage getting that test paid for by your insurance companies. To find out that genetic information, or halothane contracture testing, and management of malignant hyperthermia. Well, that's on us. That's the anesthesiologist, and we can help with the testing and the management of malignant hyperthermia. And the genetic testing individuals can help with the diagnosis and help with the testing. But when it comes down to it, every specialty sort of has the thing that they're known for. And within the world of anesthesiology, this is the one thing that really hits so close to home for an anesthesiologist, because it is the agents that we deal with daily that are actually the triggering agents for this disease disorder. So it's an anesthesiologist who is your best bet for not only taking care of you before the surgery, but during and after.
Got it. Great. Thank you. So how is MH treated? And we had a specific question around the benefits and concerns of oral Dantrolene, and whether or not that's something that makes sense for people that are MH susceptible.
So malignant hyperthermia is like a fire, like we talked. So we're going to keep going back to that fire in the operating room. Dantrolene, if you want to think of it that way, is the fire extinguisher, that specialty antidote for malignant hyperthermia that is needed to treat the crisis event. So that is the drug that all the anesthesiologists know to reach for to treat someone that's undergoing a malignant hyperthermia crisis. As far as with oral Dantrolene, so typically with an MH crisis, it happens in the operating room, PACU, ICU, or when they come in the emergency department. Dantrolene is administered in an IV way through an intravenous line and given like with a fluid push. But there are occasions where people either know they're malignant hyperthermia susceptible or they're experiencing cramps, and they could actually take an oral agent of Dantrolene and to even reduce the risks of spasms, cramping, tightness. Patients such as that have CP, cerebral palsy, MS, or spinal injuries actually that have really bad spasms and cramping and tightness will also take oral Dantrolene. It is given in dosages to both adults and children. So to determine if you're a candidate or not, it really goes on you. And what is your severity of the cramps and tightness, what is the risk factors, and is it really working with the doctor to determine is the cramps and tightness due to hydration, is it due to training episodes, or is it that sort of warning indicator that you're bridging on that malignant hyperthermia line? That is a conversation that you and your doctor really need to have together. And those doctors that can have that conversation, obviously your internist, your family doctor can start that conversation, but they'll often call in an anesthesiologist, that specialty knowledge area of malignant hyperthermia, to help facilitate the conversation and get you the best care.
And is Dantrolene the only known antidote to an MH crisis?
We use a lot of medicines within a malignant hyperthermia crisis, such as, tons of fluids. We can use agents to drive the calcium. A little back, that's the Dantrolene, or the potassium. So there's a lot of agents that we use within a crisis event to save a person's life.
Right.
The main drug that we use to save someone in a malignant hyperthermia crisis is Dantrolene, because again, it is the antidote, if you think of it that way.
I've heard about like an MH cart. So
Oh,
is
yes.
that something that is in every OR?
Every operating room or any location. So I'm going to say location because sometimes their anesthesia drugs are found outside the operating room. So anywhere there's a triggering agent or gasoline around, you should have a malignant hyperthermia cart, or the contents of a cart in a box or a cart or a locker or somewhere. They should be around where anesthesia care is provided using those gas agents or that succinylcholine, or in the emergency department. It's important as well, because where is your patient going to come if they come back to the hospital with an MH crisis? They're going to come into your emergency department.
Right.
So yes, they should have an MH cart, and it should be stocked with not only the Dantrolene, but other things that an anesthesiologist or care provider team would need to handle the crisis event. So it's a very specialized cart that has everything we need to help patients that are undergoing a crisis event and save their life.
Great. So if I've been diagnosed, what do I need to know, and what general precautions do I need to take going forward?
Okay. So if you're diagnosed as MH-susceptible, the number one thing you need to do, and you found out you've done this, is first is alert your family and have a good conversation with them and talk to them, because it involves them. Because again, genetics. So if you have it, that means it's a high probability of the ones you love that are genetically connected to you or blood relatives, they have it too, and are at risk. So the conversation must start with them. The second is make sure your doctor is there. That you have the information, you have a teammate, because you're going to need to get information to your doctor, your family. You're going to need to know this when you go into any surgical event and process. So you're going to have to share information. Then you want to find out more. Susceptibility testing, genetic testing is always offered and important to find out further information, really hammer down if what you're dealing with, and also if it's a genetic code that you can get tested for your family. Other things that are important to do. But also the next step is, again, identifying yourself as that. That's why it's important to really go forth and either get bracelets to make sure that you're identified to your friends and family. I deal with a lot of individuals that go out into communities. They always make sure that they have the buddy system with them when either they're training. I deal with a lot of athletes that train, that they have someone that knows about what's happening and can help them care for in a state of emergency. But also, it's important to find out information. You got to find out more with what you're dealing with. I encourage everyone, if you're MH susceptible, to visit the Malignant Hyperthermia Association of the US, MHouse. Go to our website, find out more. We have a patients page that will guide you through, and this is some of the materials on that page that will help you find out more, because knowledge is power in this situation. It is important for, again, you're not only protecting yourself, you're protecting those you love, because they are the ones that are genetically linked to you, and those are the ones that are also going to be at risk. So protect everyone.
Great. In case of emergency, you just alluded to this, what's the best way to let others know that I'm MH susceptible? What do first responders look for?
Well, the first thing they look for, and we've been all trained to do this, is to look for the bracelet or the necklace. So the first thing they do is they'll they'll grab hold of the arms and look for bracelets signed or the necklace. I give kudos. I've seen some fantastic tattoos for malignant hyperthermia and allergies to succinylcholine and stuff, and I applaud you because some of them are outstanding ink. But I want to warn you about that too, because I have been involved in a case where the patient did have a tattoo that had a wonderful MH like sort of warning sign on it. They didn't have any of the bracelets on, and they had an accident that actually involved the tattoo, and it became non-visible. So please be careful. I think it's fantastic that you have the tattoo and that people are aware, but share the knowledge. Make sure all your family members know about it. I'd strongly recommend, even if you have the tattoo, still wear the bracelet, because that's what we're trained to look for. And then we might, be dealing with a broken arm, and maybe you have a concussion, and they're not looking at your chest at that moment to see if you have that tattoo in that location. They're dealing with your arm.
Right.
So maybe if you have a concussion, they're going to give you a paralyzing agent to put a breathing tube to make sure you're safe. If they don't know you have it, they might accidentally give you a triggering agent, because we use it a lot in the field. Even those ambulance drivers, the EMTs, carry succinylcholine to establish airways. Very important that you share that knowledge and make sure everyone's out there. So please take the extra time, get a fancy schnazzy MedicAlert bracelet, bedazzle it however you want, but please wear one.
Yeah, and we partnered with MHouse for a long time because we recognize how important it is for somebody that has malignant hyperthermia. But you'll find a page on the MedicAlert site that talks about the partnership, and for anyone that enrolls in a new MedicAlert membership, and if you use that code MHouse, we actually donate 20% of that membership fee back to MHouse to help fund their very important work, the hotline and other things. So please do take a look at that when you have the chance. That'll be a link that we include for you. All right. Big question. If you have MH, can you ever have surgery? What about outpatient surgery? What about dental surgery?
So the great news is, yes, you can have surgery. It doesn't mean you can't be cared for by an anesthesiologist and undergo any surgery you need to have. It means that you can't have the gasoline agents, the triggering agents. So what an anesthesiologist does when we hear we have a malignant hyperthermia susceptible patient coming to our operating room, we take precautions, it's called. So we put charcoal filters on the machine to capture any stray anesthesia gas from the machine. So to further not have any gas hit the patient. We also avoid use of those triggering agents, and we use other agents such as medications such as, I know these are going to be odd sounding, but propofol, we use other gas agents to keep you asleep, keep you safe, keep you comfortable, but avoid the triggers. So there's things we can do to just sort of take a detour, keep you safe, but also not expose you to unnecessary risks, because that's what we're about. We're about to make sure your anesthetic experience is as safe as possible for you. And outpatient surgery, absolutely. Make sure whatever outpatient surgery center that you utilize, whether it be dental office or anything else, if they're going through exposure agents or anything at all, if you hear the word anesthesia, you want to make sure that they have an MH cart, that they've done drill training, that they know what they're talking about, and they're prepared for you. So often they'll do an intake phone call for some surgery centers, and don't be surprised if sometimes you say the word I am malignant hyperthermia susceptible. They sometimes will say, well, you know what, maybe you shouldn't be done at an outpatient surgery center. They'll put you to the hospital. It does occur. It doesn't necessarily have to occur. Outpatient surgery centers are very well equipped, many of them, because it's part of a standard of care to take care of malignant hyperthermia susceptible people. It's knowledge. It comes down to knowledge is power. But also the care team members who are specialized. Anesthesiologists are fantastic doctors. Not that I'm biased in any way, but it is a person that is trained to give a very detail-oriented history, find out if you have MH, and really take care of things to avoid any triggering agents and take care of you in the operating room.
Well, it's interesting. I've seen some real great comments in the chat, and I want to give a shout out to Jenny, who said that she's MH susceptible and she encouraged her dentist to get a cart, and now they have one, so that they're prepared now for not just her but any other people that may have any type of incident. So I think that whole idea of patients being advocates for themselves Not
Yes.
only benefits them, but benefits a lot of other people too. So thank you, people like Jenny, for doing that.
So kudos, strong work.
Yeah. I did just want to call out, this is a great publication that's on the MHouse website. Under the section for MH letters and forms, there's a lot of great information there. If you need a letter to send to your kid's school, or you need something to send to your insurance company about paying for genetic testing, lots of great information there. But this one specifically, which is, you're going into a surgical procedure, here are all the things that you need to think about and discuss with your doctor, with your anesthesiologist, before you go into that. And I think, knowing that you've had that conversation up front could increase your peace of mind significantly going into any kind of surgical procedure.
Absolutely.
So here's something I know it's near and dear to your heart. Is there a link between MH and excessive heat or heat stroke?
As far as we know, there's something there, but we're not sure about the link. We have found a relationship between a person that undergoes heat stroke or heat-related illness or injury and those that have malignant hyperthermia. They look similar, believe it or not, and it has to do with that fire episode. They get really hot temperature, muscles break down, they get rigid and tight. It looks a lot the same. And we have found that individuals that have experienced malignant hyperthermia tend to have more episodes of heat-related illness and injury or heat stroke. And the same happens the other way. So those that have heat stroke and heat-related injury seem to have more episodes of malignant hyperthermia. We're not sure of what that bridge and relationship is, but we know there's something there. So if you have a family member that has had a heat stroke episode, I would be very much obliged as an anesthesiologist if you bring that to the anesthesiologist and say, listen, they've had an episode or two of heat stroke before, I think there's a possibility there, or bring it to your doctor, bring it to the anesthesiologist, definitely with surgeries. But again, be that advocate for yourself. There is usually something there. Again, I so love to talk about this topic because I deal with a lot of athletes that go out that have malignant hyperthermia that want to train. Right. And they are very afraid of going out into episodes where they're going to be exposed to either extreme heat. So those that want to go into military training or the police academy, knowing that they're going to be under a severe physiologic stress, heat-related stressors as well, they're afraid to trigger. And the military has been great about testing and trying to find these individuals before they get put in a situation where they might have injury or damage. But high-performance athletes, there are some athletes out there, and I could tell you I have a few that I have worked with in the past that have malignant hyperthermia and are very high-performing athletes. Mm-hmm. And some that are sort of road warriors as well, and they take some Dantrolene, oral Dantrolene, to try to manage their symptoms, but know that there's a side effect of the Dantrolene, oral Dantrolene, as far as weakness that you have to balance out in their training regimen. With Tokyo coming up, with the high humidities and heat in Tokyo, that's going to be a huge impact for our athletes going to Japan. So I have been working with the U.S. Olympic Committee to come up with like a screening tool to help sort of identify those individuals that might be at risk, and to make sure that they're identified, and also that we have what it takes to take care of our athletes, and to make sure that they're safe no matter where they are and where they compete.
So it sounds like you're saying there's still no explicit proven link yet, but there's a belief that excessive heat could potentially trigger, for someone that is already susceptible, could potentially trigger a crisis. Yes.
Unfortunately, that link has not been found yet, but there's enough of a shadow, if you will, between the two items that there's something there. And I always say, out of an abundance of caution, comes care. Making sure that, again, you're your best advocate. You're the best advocate for your child. You're the best advocate. If you're a coach out there, you're the best advocate for your athlete. If you're an athletic trainer, same thing. You should be out there, and you should ensure that, you make sure that your athlete either is properly identified, and that every coach, if you're a mom out there and your kid's out there, competing, that their coach, their athletic trainer, and everybody around them knows that they're malignant hyperthermia susceptible, and they need to know what to look for. Is the patient, are they, complaining of they're tight? Are they really overheating to the point where it's a cool fall day? Why are they so hot?
Right.
And why are they sort of collapsing a little bit and they can't hold their body weight up? That's a warning sign. Now you're bridging into a serious event where you need to get a paramedic involved quickly, and you need to tell them they're MH susceptible. You need to get them to the emergency room. You got to tell everyone that, Dantrolene is needed. Get the anesthesiologist on call to meet them in the emergency department.
Right.
You can save their life.
Wow. All right. We've actually talked about exercise, so I'm going to go on to the next question because I think this is a really important one. How does MHouse help medical professionals diagnose and manage a possible MH crisis?
Well, the great thing is we're educators at heart as well. We love to teach. So we not only help with drill training, we help provide information as far as with the treatment, the training, anything that has changed in the treatment protocols. We also ensure that they have tips and tricks to sort of how to not only manage and recognize things, but make sure that they're training up to date. We're there to be their partners, to make sure that they're ready, willing, and able to be your partner as a patient in the operating room and outside the operating room. So we also provide with Hotline, MHouse provides an MH hotline so that any provider that is experiencing an MH crisis, whether they think they are the best to treat MH or not, they can call us any time of the day, any day of the year, and we're there. We're there to answer the call. We are there to partner with them as they go through the differential diagnosis as they're dealing with in the operating room. We're there virtually with them to help them guide and save lives. So we are the absolute sort of silent partner behind things. And not only physicians can call us. We get phone calls from nurses in the room, ICU doctors, emergency room doctors, nursing staff, within any care provider that says, I think I'm in trouble and I think my patient's at risk. I need help, and we're there to answer that call.
This is a little, I don't know, a little inside, but we've worked with you with MHouse on the hotline for a long time. It's actually the MedicAlert emergency response team that fields the initial call and then connects to the consultant, the MH consultant who is on call at that particular time. And it is a privilege and an honor for us to do that. And I've had an opportunity to listen to a couple of those calls, and the relief in the practitioner's voice when they get someone on the line who says, yes, you're not crazy, that you are right, this is what's happening and here's what you need to do. It is really an amazing service that saves lives every day. And like I said, we're just honored to be a small part of that.
And as providers, we're the volunteers. I mean, we're there to give our time, our expertise, and our passion for teaching, for educating, but for caring for the patients that are there and need us most. And we're delighted to partner to make sure that we have the ability to provide the service to everyone, and how important it is that it's there.
So I think we're going to talk a little bit more now about some of the resources for patients and families. And it really all comes back to MHouse, right?
Yes. And the great thing about MHouse is we're there for the providers that are in the room fighting the battles. We are there for the educators who need to learn more about making sure their staff is ready for a crisis. So before they even enter the operating room, we're there for the patients so they could learn more about the disease or disorder so that they can be their best advocates and be the advocate for their kid or their grandma or their whoever that they're there to make sure is safe. We're there for them as well. And even for those individuals, the students that want to learn more, we're there to be a source of education, knowledge, and training. And for researchers, we're there as well. We're pushing the limits to learn more, to find out those answers that will help better care for our patients and expand knowledge of malignant hyperthermia, save more lives, and expand science out even further. So malignant hyperthermia and MH, MHouse is there for not only one purpose of to care for patients, but we're there for a multitude of reasons, and they're all the right ones.
You know, one question that has come up several times in the chat, which was not something we talked about prior, but I think you'll be able to talk to it, is several people have said, my doctor, the anesthesiologist, doesn't necessarily take me seriously when I bring up MH concerns. Can you speak to that at all? What advice you might give to somebody who's trying to advocate for themselves?
So if you're going to your primary care doctor, your internist, and say, listen, I really think I have this malignant hyperthermia. I am not sure how it'll impact my life. And a lot of the providers that are out there will think, wait a minute, I remember malignant hyperthermia from my surgical rotation way back when. And I know that it's related to the operating room and anesthesia gases. Well, anesthesia gases, they're nowhere around here, so don't worry about it. And they don't necessarily blow them off, but they sometimes don't realize it impacts your everyday life. Because not only are you worried now about if you get in a car accident, if your kids get in a car accident, it's genetically related. They forget that sometimes.
Right.
It can cause muscle spasms and fatigue and issues. So it's more than just a risk when you walk into the operating room. It's there. And what you can do is, again, be your best advocate. Go to your provider fully loaded with information and say, listen, I want to share this with you. This is what I think. Can you help me? But also know that we're here too. MHouse is here for you as well. We are there to advocate with you, to get either further testing, to help you find answers, to be a source of information. We're there. We're your absolute partners with everyone. And we will be at your side as you go through this journey of having malignant hyperthermia or MH susceptibility. Again, we want to work with you and again, help you through these times.
I think that's a great answer in that, you don't have to go into it alone, right? You have the backing of this organization that can connect you with other people who are living with this condition and connect you with, experts within the field that can help you get your needs met in every situation. So thank you for that. I just want to point out, we will, to everyone that's registered for the event, we will be sending a follow-up email tomorrow. There'll be a replay of today's session, and we'll have these links that we've talked about in here. Either, if you didn't screenshot them, we'll be sending them directly to you. But we encourage you, when you get that, to please check out all the information that's on the MHouse site, because it is a wealth of knowledge around, this very unique condition that's very hard to find information on in other places. The patient emergency checklist is another one that we've talked about. I will very quickly say that if you enjoyed this, we do these about once a month. We have different topics. Recently, we've talked about dementia, rare diseases, living with epilepsy. So please visit our website at MedicAlert if you're interested in seeing past episodes. We have another episode of this coming up at the end of July, which we'll send out information on, where we'll be covering food allergies. And that's a topic that I know a lot of people deal with. And then in September, we will have 2 sessions around hearing loss, and then another one around fall prevention and maintaining agility for older people. I wanted to also call out one more thing. This is brand new. This is something we just launched last week. We talked earlier in the presentation about how every MedicAlert member has that full medical profile that you can keep up to date. You can go online anytime and update it, or you can call our member services team to update it. We've now made that available via a QR code. So we can provide you with a card that has that QR code. So if you're going into a new doctor, or going into a new provider, or talking to a school nurse or someone, you can very quickly scan the QR code and get access to all that information that's stored in there. So we'll send you a link to that as well. Please check that out. I'll also mention that MedicAlert, both MedicAlert and MHouse are 501c3 nonprofit organizations. We rely on donations and to fund both of our organizations' life-saving work. So I would encourage you, if you feel so moved, to please make a donation. And then very quickly, we're going to ask if Tracy, if you can throw up the survey. This helps us do programming for the future. How helpful was this session to you? And if you can answer that for us. And while you're doing that, I wanted to say, Dr. Watt, thank you again. It's been a real pleasure talking to you. I've learned a lot today, and I can tell from the comments in the chat, a lot of people have learned a lot today. And I've seen a lot of people saying just, thank you for talking about this, because people don't talk about it as much as maybe we should. So we're happy to help you spread awareness, and we're so grateful to you for bringing your expertise to today's session.
Thank you so much. I've had a great time, and I hope to hear from all of you soon, and visit our MHouse website, find out more.
Great. And I will say thank you to MHouse, Tina, and the rest of the team there who helped make this possible. We'll be signing off. As I mentioned, the replay will be available tomorrow. But thank you again, everyone, for joining. Please join us in the future. And we're very appreciative that you spent the last hour with us. Have a great afternoon.